Let's transfer these plant cuttings from water to soil. I get a lot of questions about this process, and it's not as tricky as you may think. As a general rule, you want to wait until your roots are at least 2 inches long before transferring them to soil. I like to let mine grow longer and ensure that I have first and secondary roots on my plants. As with all my indoor houseplants, I have a nursery pot inside a decorative pot. This is to make sure that there is plenty of drainage and also makes it easier to water and size up when the time comes. You want to add some soil to the bottom of your planter and then place your plant inside. You want to make sure that it is fairly snug, as too much soil can cause issues. Once you're happy with how your cuttings are sitting, you can add more soil around the sides and to the top. Make sure you tap the sides of your planter so there is no empty air pockets. Now this step is optional, but I like to add a little slow release fertilizer at this point. You only need to add this once a season, and it's a really good way to make sure your plants are getting all the nutrients they need. Next, you want to give your plant a really good soak, and I water from the top for this. You want to make sure all the roots and soil are wet because the roots have just come from hydro. If you put them into a dry environment, they can go into transplant shock. And that's it. I think she looks super cute, and it's definitely not as scary as you may think. I've seen lots of guides online that suggest you add soil to the water gradually over a week, but you definitely don't need to do this. If you're wondering what this plant is, it is actually two. I've got a pothos in there and also a Monstera Adansonii. You can definitely bundle clippings of plants together as long as they are on the same watering and light schedule. You can see here that all my plants are in fact in nursery pots, and I'm putting them back in their decorative pots after a water. My propagated plant is front and center and doing so well. I've made this transfer about a year ago now, and she's growing really well. For the Monstera and the pothos, I like to water these weekly. I've continued to fertilize seasonally, and I'm liking just letting them both hang down. As with most houseplants, they do like a brighter spot and to see the sun. During the summer, this room is fairly sun-drenched, but in winter, none of the rays were reaching over here, so I've added a few little grow lights as well. You are supposed to put these on top of the plant, not under it, but with vining plants like this, it doesn't really matter where the light source is coming from. Both of these plants are fairly resilient to pests, and I haven't had any issues or needed to do any treatments over the past year. I also tend to bottom water, which avoids any fungus gnats. I hadn't realized how much this plant had grown until this clip. You can really see how much she's taken over my bookshelf compared to the first video. Let's go through my tips of how to successfully propagate a fiddle leaf fig tree. It has been 1 whole year since I chopped my fiddle leaf fig and chopped it right here. I took this cutting in winter, so regrowth was a little bit slow, but once it started, it did not stop. To encourage her to grow more, I kept her in a sunny spot and fertilized monthly. Look how much she's grown and how much healthier she looks. To propagate my cutting, I chose the water propagation method. I cut the lower branches off my 2 sections, allowed them to dry overnight, and then popped them in water. Again, because this was winter, roots did take a few weeks to start growing. You can propagate and prune year-round, but regrowth is much faster in the warmer months. Got the roots. She's ready to plant. Once the roots were long enough, I planted my propagation in a chunky soil mix. Fiddle leaf figs do like a well-draining soil. And just like the mother plant, I popped her in a sunny spot to grow. I misted her as well to encourage more growth. Here is the section I propagated. You can see that she's growing well. For full disclosure, I took 2 cuttings, one rooted and one didn't. The one that didn't root was the very top, and the one that did root was the section in between, so I cut below and above. I don't know if that was just my experience or a tip, but this is why I always suggest take multiple cuttings, because hopefully one of them will root. Whilst in water, it rooted really well, but it didn't start pushing out new leaves until I did plant it in soil as well. Again, I don't know if that was just my experience. I probably wouldn't keep a fiddle leaf fig propagation cutting in hydro full time, just because from my experience, it didn't push out any new leaves. I am obsessed with this propagation. I'm so happy that I have a new fiddle leaf and that the mother plant has grown 2 whole feet. First time I chopped this fiddle leaf, I went straight across and it grew 1 new stem. So I thought for the other side, I would try cutting it on an angle, and instead of just getting 1 stem, it has branched into 10 stems. Look. Make sure you use sharp pruning shears when you take your cutting. For this second stem, I made the cut in summer and regrowth was much faster. Within a few weeks, I had these new little buds forming, and I honestly can't believe how many new growth points there are, and I'm wondering what it's going to look like soon. I would call that a successful propagation. Now, with the Fiddle Leaf Fig or the Ficus layrata, you don't want to put this straight into water. If you do that, you may get rotting of the stem. What you want to do is leave it to callus overnight or for a day or two so that this is no longer wet and raw, and then when you put it in the water, it won't rot. One of my biggest ongoing tips is do not treat it like glass. It's not going to break. You should be able to move your fiddle without the leaves falling off. I've never lost a leaf off this one unless I've cut it, which is why these ones at the bottom are going a little bit yellow because they're aging out. Usually these would fall off, but she's hanging on to her leaves. Here's an example of a heat stressed leaf which I removed, which should have fallen off on its own. That's it from me on how to propagate and branch out a Fiddle Leaf Fig. Shake her too. I made this gorgeous Begonia Maculata plant entirely from cuttings. Begonias are such an easy plant to water propagate because the roots come from nodes and there are heaps on this plant. You can propagate a begonia by sticking the cuttings straight into the soil, but I prefer the water propagation method because you can see exactly what is happening. They also push out very pretty root systems, so it's nice to see in the glass vessels. You can see there's roots coming from multiple spots on the begonia. Those are all the node stems. I like to wait until my propagation roots are at least 2 inches long and have primary and secondary roots. Once the roots are long enough, you can transition them into a well-draining soil. I find begonias like to have fairly wet soil, so water this one more frequently than my other plants, so you want to make sure that your pot has plenty of drainage holes. Once she's all planted, make sure she's in a sunny spot. This is how you will get the gorgeous red on the back of your leaves. Look at all these cute new leaves. It's been a few months now and look how much she's grown. This begonia is going to be such a bushy plant with so many different propagations planted together. You can let begonias climb or let them trail, and at the moment mine is doing both. I haven't quite decided yet if I'm going to put her on a trellis to grow up or if I'm going to let her continue to hang down and trail. Let me know which you think looks best. Let's propagate a snake plant pot. This more compact snake plant is a bird's nest snake plant. She's a bit thick and we love her for it. This snake plant became a little root bound, and although I love the look of the snake plants all together, I'm going to separate them out. As they were so compact, there wasn't enough airflow between the plants, resulting in some of the leaves beginning to rot. This rot can easily spread to the rest of the plant, so it's best to break them up now. During this process, I found a little pup, which I've decided to water propagate. We'll come back to the pup shortly. The fantastic cracking you can hear is the rhizomes breaking apart. And yes, there is an ASMR version of this if you prefer that one. Rhizomes are a thick root system. Turmeric and ginger are great examples of rhizomes. If you don't know what they look like, they form the shallow but thick root system that supports snake plants. They grow outward and slightly down, allowing the plant to access moisture and nutrients efficiently. This is also where new shoots and pups will grow from. You can propagate snake plants via leaf cuttings, but in my experience, they can take months to root, whereas pups take just a few weeks. Now my pup is separated, I'm going to let it callus slightly overnight. This will help to prevent rot. Once she has her dry protective layer, I'm just going to put her in a vessel. You can propagate snake plants straight into soil, but I prefer to watch the roots grow. So let's do just that. You can see there is bright white roots growing from the base of my pup. I have kept her in a warm, sunny spot with indirect sunlight. For my water propagations, I top up the water as needed. I completely change the water whenever I change the vessel. I move to bigger vessels as my root system grows. You tend to let the roots grow for longer like I do. You want to be careful that the root system does not outgrow the opening of the vessel. Sadly, if you knock off propagation roots, new ones won't always grow in their place. Best to give your plant plenty of room to grow. This snake plant has been living in water for 4 months, and I'm now going to transfer her to soil. When transferring a water propagation to soil, you want to make sure the roots are at least 2 inches long. Waiting until you have first and secondary roots will also help your plant stabilize in the soil. I am using a succulent potting mix here, but you can also make your own. You want to make sure it's well draining, so add in some sand and pumice. I'm also using a terracotta pot because these are great for succulents and cacti. They absorb extra water away from the soil, are a porous material so airflow can also get into the roots. I also really love the aesthetic appeal of terracotta. The gorgeous earthy orange really complements the green of this snake plant. Over time, terracotta also develops a natural patina. There is a reason why these pots are a timeless classic. As for this snake plant pop, I'm going to pop it in a sunnier spot now that it is planted. I water my cacti and succulents monthly, making sure that the soil dries out completely in between. Of course, I've transferred the mother plant into terracotta now too. We love a matching moment. I have had this Monstera Adansonii cuttings propagating in water for about 6 months now, and I think it is time to transfer her to soil. As well as my cutting, I've also got some soil, a decorative pot, a nursery pot, and also a little mesh round which stops any of the soil from falling through the bottom of the nursery pot. I'm going to put the soil in this glass bowl just so I don't get soil all over my desk. You can also use a potting mat or whatever you like. I will still get soil everywhere. I half fill my nursery pot with soil and then I'm going to add in my water propagations. A moment for these roots. I've actually got 2 separate cuttings here, but I'm going to plant them together. You can see how all the roots have grown from a node, and there's also first and secondary roots. I like to wait until there's both first and secondary roots, but you definitely don't need to wait until it's this long. 1 or 2 inches is fine. On this one, you can see that roots have actually grown out from multiple nodes. So go on there, there, there. Incredible. Let's plant her. You can see she's nice and snug in here, and I've made sure that all the roots are in the soil. Now I'm going to water her to make sure it's really saturated. As she was a water propagation, the roots are used to that watery life, so we want to make sure that it's very hydrated to start with. I'm just going to use the same water that she was in. I'm going to pour it all in. This is way too much water, but you don't want any dry pockets of soil. That was obviously way too much water, but I've done this for 2 reasons. 1 is to make sure that there is no dry soil pockets in there. And 2, it really helps to settle the soil down, and you can see that some of the roots are exposed now that the soil is wet, so I'm going to add more on top. And you guessed it, some more water. Now that she's drip dried, I'm going to add her to a pot. And I'm just going to add a little trellis as well to have this climb.